Hello and welcome. Happy Tuesday. We're glad you're able to join us today for another important webinar on credentials. We encourage you to participate in this conversation, so we ask you to please use the Q&A feature to post any questions for our panelists. You can ask your questions at any time, and you can also post anonymously. You can turn the closed captions on as well by going to the bottom panel of Zoom. And lastly, this webinar is recorded and it will be available on our AACRAO website by this evening. And without any further ado, I would like to hand it over to Noah to get us started. Thank you, Noah.
Hey, thanks so much, Velma, and thank you to AACRAO for hosting this webinar in which we're really excited to preview some of the credential innovation track for next week's annual AACRAO meeting. Thank you to those of you who are joining us live, sharing the currency of your time with us this afternoon, as well as everyone who takes the time to watch this recording once it goes live. I'm going to go ahead and we have a lot to cover in the next hour, and I'm going to kick it over to Mike Simmons with AACRAO to start off of just kind of sharing, Mike, just what is this credential track about at AACRAO that we're going to be previewing today?
Thanks, Noah, and thanks everybody for joining. The Credentials Innovation Track is basically what it sounds like. We know that in the world of credentials, it is an evolving conversation, from the transcripts that we all know and love to all the various and new ways of expressing learning and learning outcomes that are happening. And some of those best are represented here today, and you'll hear about them. But at AACRAO, we're trying to facilitate a conversation for our members so that no matter where you are, and also for people who aren't AACRAO members, doesn't matter where you are in this conversation, you can have the basic information at a minimum and the latest information at a maximum. And so the idea is at the annual meeting, we set up a number of sessions in a track and designated them that give you a pretty full 360-degree view of innovation and credentials, whether it's alternative credentials, credit, badges, micro-credentials, all the word salad that you'll hear and that you already hear, and hopefully bring some clarity to that while at the same time exposing everyone to the wide range of things that are happening. That's the goal. We have a plenary speaker identified, Brandon Bustede from the Kaplan organization, formerly of Gallup, will be there to talk to us about the context of higher education, and then some of our sessions represented here, plus more that will happen at the meeting. So we hope that you'll be able to, if you're not coming to the meeting, some of these sessions will be live streamed for those of you who are going to participate virtually. But the idea today is to give a preview and also to give you a hint so that you could engage in conversations outside of the annual meeting. So we have lots of purposes here we're going to try and solve. In order to do that, I need to be quiet. So I'm going to pass it back to Noah, but with that context, and I want to thank the folks who are here today to give you some good information about the good work that they're doing and a preview of their sessions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mike. And one other thing for folks who are really excited, not just to learn from these presenters, but also share your amazing work that you and your institutions are doing. AACRAO, along with UPCEA, is co-sponsoring this fall's Convergence Conference, all about credential innovation. And the call for proposals for those of you watching live are due this Friday. That is Convergence, and I will find the link to that and drop it into the chat for everybody who's watching this live. And so that you can also, like these amazing thought leaders in space, share the great work that you and your institution are doing. To get us started, getting us excited about next week, we're going to begin with you, Megan. If you go ahead and share your screen if you have some slides, and I will mute myself and pass it off to you to share what you're going to be sharing next week at the annual meeting.
Sure. Let me get it started here. Just a few to help aid our discussion here. Let's see. All right. Hopefully everybody can see that. Let me move this off the screen out of the way. I might be apt to, start the conversation here just because I will qualify all of this by saying we are at the very beginning, right? So if you are looking for kind of a how do you get started? What are some of the tools you're using, like real life in the moment experience with this? So we are the ones who can share some of that. And, you know, we're currently making our way through the process, and spoiler alert, it is not linear, despite how well I may have, you know, polished up my slides here. So, yes, our session is Walk Before You Run, community collaboration to implement a digital credential wallet. And I think, if I remember, it's Tuesday, middle of the conference, right after lunch. So if you you know, are looking for somewhere to go after you get your belly full, then this is a good one to start out with. Like I said, we're working through the process right now. So my agenda essentially covers those steps from project initiation through we're currently in what I consider project execution. And then I do have some like thoughts and insights towards where we'll move in terms of project monitoring and control and the close of the project. Really to start out, what I'm talking about is like, how did we even get started with this, right? Like evolutions like this can seem really monstrous, but there are ways that I think we can effectively break those down into smaller steps and apply like a methodical process to those steps so that we can at least, you know, get to the point that we can rapidly implement something, provide that proof of concept to get started, and you know, work toward building that critical mass that we're looking for within this whole landscape, right? So I talk about how we started with an initial design sprint, how we had conversations during that session. It was an all-day session for, you know, like, where are we now? What are we seeing as far as the changes coming down the pike? What would we need to do to be able to take advantage of those? And what would that future, you know, state look like, right? And how, you know, where are our opportunities there, both within sectors and across sectors? At the end of the design sprint, we arrived at our problem statement that we used to then frame the rest of our project, right? So essentially what I just said there in the first bullet point. And then our goal is, how might we design a different system of capture and transmission along with the institutional and cultural practices to support it? So what do we need to do to really achieve what we're looking for in this future state of credentials then? Towards the end of that whole, you know, project initiation, project scoping, right? We did arrive at what we're considering our phase 1 pilot commitments. And this is what's been agreed upon, not just within Grand Valley, but then our partners, right, across that collaboration. So we are the 4-year institution representative in the West Michigan region. We have a 2-year representative in our local community college, and then we currently have 4 high schools that we're partnering with. So like, that's the piece of this that we're really excited about, right? Is that collaboration across institutions so that we can essentially like test the piping, right? Like, what does it take to get this stood up? How do we integrate it with our current practices and systems? And then let's see what the uptake is with it and how we get that kind of flow then of credentials between the issuers and those who would potentially be receiving that information. So this is what we're looking for in 18-month pilots. We started, like I said, this winter, and it's going to go through the next academic year. We're allowing ourselves some time then for data collection there toward the end, and we would do a wrap up in December of 2025. Also, as part of this, right, we had to make a case for why this is important, right, to begin with, but then we're continuously adding to the use cases that will be of interest to this project. So what we're looking at right now involves, you know, pathway embarking and charting, you know, student, both academic and non-academic experiences, where we can, you know, go in later phases with some of the competency mapping and things like that. And then, of course, you know, the benefits to admissions and records that will be of real interest to, you know, most of the audience here attending our annual conference. We talk a little bit about stakeholders, right? And of course, we know registrar's office for this audience is key. Pretty much anything we do, we're looking to our close partners, right, in information technology to help us make that happen. So those are my 2 like core stakeholders I consider as I'm working on this project. But then you have to think out like beyond that, even within your organization, right? Is like marketing and communications, student support, who all, you know, needs to know about what's going on. And then who could we pull in, you know, like early support, those who are going to really help carry our project forward and be the spokespeople, right? So who not only wants to know about it, but wants to have a hand in the work that we're doing. So I talked to that a little bit in the presentation. And then really what we're ending with is what are those success measures we're looking for, right? Some of this can seem a little fuzzy. You may not be able to put exact numbers to a lot of it. Hopefully we do come up with a mix of like quantitative and qualitative data, right, to help support our case. But right now we've kind of classified them in these 4 big buckets, right? Like I said, we want to prove the data integrations, what we need to like logistically make this happen, the institutional uptake, the participant uptake. So that's speaking both to our learners and the institutions that are involved. And hopefully throughout the pilot, we can, invite others to join us. And then what other, like I said, with those use cases we're speaking to, what is that future value add, things that we can look for future opportunities to expand in later phases and continue to carry this information, this project forward. So like I said, this is kind of the quick and dirty of it. If, like I said, after lunch, you spent your time catching up on your email, I do end with a summary, 5 major key takeaways, but you have to come to the presentation to get that information. So again, there's the title of my presentation and just quick contact information. If you have any questions for me ahead of time, or want to start some interesting discussion that we can build upon when I do see you at AACRAO. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. And I love that, in the lead up said, hey, we want to give them enough to get excited about, but not give it all away. And you get extra credit there with with the challenge. I love that. And something else that, in case people haven't gone into the annual meeting event app from Whova, you do have the ability to find all of these sessions. You can look them up. The easy way is by looking up by track. And you can find them all and add them to your schedule. And you also, to Megan's point, if you have questions ahead of time that you hope a presenter addresses, you actually inside of the event app can precede your questions that you hope to get out of these so that presenters can plan ahead to meet your needs. Without further ado, we're going to turn it over to you, Keisha Campbell, to share a little highlight of your session, what people can expect to learn next week.
Hi, everybody. And tough act to follow with Megan. That nice slide, carrots of slides. Keish doesn't have any slides, guys. I'm freewheeling here. You gotta rock with me. So I'm excited because I will be doing the comprehensive learner record and the registrar. So planning for a successful and sustainable implementation. So at Morgan State, we are working through our process, and I've worked with my colleagues across campus, and we're continuing to work with our colleagues across campus to roll out our comprehensive learner record with our colleagues at Territorium. And so one of the things that we've been trying to make sure that we do is treat everybody at the institution as a learner. That's one of the things that we've embraced kind of early on, which is that faculty are learners, staff are learners. So if there are other ways in which we can leverage the comprehensive learner record across campus and not just in the classroom or for students or outside of there, what are the various ways that we can use that? How do we make sure we talk to people across campus and outside of campus, including employers, to show what the value added here. And then just basically, what is the role of the registrar in this process? Some folks have been pretty hesitant or reticent to participate. Some folks have dived right in, but like, what can we do in that space? We are the record keepers of the institution. It's important that we're part of the conversation, even if we're not the ones driving the ship in every single instance. And I know that's going to be the case. Lots of schools have started programs outside of their registrar's office. They have a fully functioning team that is working on digital credentials. So there are lots of ways to do this. There's more than one way to do it, but we should be part of the conversation because it's about records, right? When somebody calls you back, you guys know my favorite is somebody calls you and it's like, hey, I was in this program 4 years ago. And you're like, I've never heard of it. Because someone is giving a credential someplace else from your institution that you don't necessarily know about. What does that look like? What is the taxonomy of your badges? We were talking earlier this week at something I was at, and we were talking about, is there a little C and a big C, a big B and a big B badges and certificates? And what does that look like on your campus? Are faculty using that within their a syllabi, and if they want to use it within their class to give credentials to say, hey, you've completed X assignment, great, but that's not going to be a university credential. The registrar is not owning those credentials. So just talking through the conversation of like, how are we going through that process and making sure that it is a sustainable process, that it makes sense for us to be part of that process, and who all on campus needs to be in that conversation. So we're really excited. I'll be doing this presentation along with Keith Look. We had a chat about this at another session at One Ed Tech last year, and I've also participated with them on a panel at One Ed Tech earlier this year. So I'm really excited about the conversation and just to look where we are. We're not done. We're nowhere close to having solved all of the challenges around how do we work with micro-credentials, but just hearing where people are at their various stages and sharing where we are is what this is all about, just dialogue and discourse. So that's it for me. I'm really excited. Tuesday, April 9th. At 9 a.m. is when our presentation is going to be. So hopefully we'll see some of you all there.
Thank you so much for that, Keisha. And I think that, you know, for anybody who's watching, they heard it from Megan, they heard from you that, you know, this is still such a maturing space. And one of the things that we really value from leaders like yourselves is sharing this early stage work, that it hasn't yet gone necessarily through, you know, the rock and roll car wash to, you know, just be totally perfect yet, but that as people are looking about where do I get started, to see other people whose arrows have already left the bow, you know, vulnerably and generously sharing like you all are is really awesome for our community. Next up, we have Kimberly, Gabby, and Darren from WGU. I will pass it over to you, Kim.
Thanks, Noah. And I'm going to actually give it to Darren to kick it off while I share my slides. Darren.
Thank you so much. And thank you, AACRAO, for giving us this opportunity. We're honored to get to participate and present at this event. So we wanted to give y'all a sneak peek of what we're going to be talking about. We're a little bit further along, I think, than some others in terms of how we're going to participate and how we are participating in the evolving learning and employment record ecosystem and the issuing of digital credentials. We actually started this journey back with the American Workforce Policy Advisory Board. I think it's been 3 years ago now, which kind of allowed us to start formalizing our thinking about how we were actually going to execute on this. WG's mission statement is to change lives for the better by creating pathways to opportunity. So what we're going to show you here in a bit, which is our vision of an achievement wallet. That's a little bit of a misnomer because it is a wallet, but it's embedded within a web-based platform that has value-add functionality built into it that actually shows people their pathways to opportunity so that they can continue to grow themselves and develop their unique skills and talent brand. All of this was made possible through generous funding from Lilly Foundation and Walmart in order to start our work with the Indiana Achievement Wallet that has now transitioned and been duplicated to become the WGU Achievement Wallet. We're going to show you some images from our wallet that is a WGU Achievement Wallet, but it's also the Indiana Achievement Wallet just under a different label. All of this is also possible through partnership and collaboration. I can't emphasize that enough. Don't feel like you have to do this alone. We didn't. And we're still learning. And Megan, I want to thank you for that image that you showed with the learner right in the center, because one of the guiding principles for us in all of this is that it be learner focused. And then the benefit of being learner focused is all of their audience, employers, other schools, other talent developers, et cetera. So at this point, I'd like to transition and turn it over to Kim, who's going to give you a sneak peek into the platform.
Great. Thanks so much, Darren. And we are very excited to provide a live demonstration of our WGU Achievement Wallet during our presentation at AACRAO. The Achievement Wallet is our way of taking action on skills-based digital credentials and bringing value and application of these digital credentials directly to WGU students. We do this through merging the career exploration and discovery capabilities of our wallet with our rich skills descriptors, our open skills libraries, our robust digital credentialing initiatives, and our learning and employment records. Our goal is to create an empowering and transformative environment that equips students with the skills and knowledge to advance in their chosen career or chosen occupation. Additionally, we have spent time getting direct feedback from students on the value and overall functionality of the WGU Achievement Wallet. And we'll talk through the results of our first beta test, which the results are shown here on this slide, and the second beta test, which we just completed a few weeks ago. We'll also discuss how we are leveraging the feedback and insights to create an even more valuable product for our students. The Achievement Wallet is segmented into 4 functional areas that have distinct value to the learner that allows them to leverage the value of digital credentials towards a new opportunity or towards advancement. This includes, as you can see here, profile, skills, credentials, and career pathways. We'll be diving into each of these areas in detail and highlighting the benefits to students and individuals broadly, the power behind learning and employment records, and we'll also talk about how educational institutions are leading the way. We will also talk about our progress towards new digital credentialing innovations and give a sneak peek into our next solution that will allow us to recognize course completions as issued verifiable digital credentials at WGU. Through the power of our Achievement Wallet platform, we had to develop a working model for how we credential and why we credential. And this led to our creation of the Unified Credential Framework. So now you're going to hear from our University Registrar, Gabby Martinez.
Thank you, Kim. So hello. Why do we have a Unified Credential Framework, and how do we define our badging structure? Well, first, we had to identify our problems to solve. And Kim, okay, thank you. Credentials are being spun up everywhere, and we knew that we didn't want to create credentials just because we could. We didn't want to add to that noise. So we needed to find a way to identify how we should credential and award badges. And this prompted us to ask, well, how should we design our credentials to provide value? And this resulted in us creating the Unified Credential Framework. When we first started issuing credentials, we lacked consistency. And as Mike mentioned earlier, we didn't have set definitions for our word salad. So by doing credential integrity alignment checks, we were able to identify the necessary criteria for our Unified Credential Framework. And this criteria includes that our credentials be, and I'm so sorry, Kim, can I have you go to the next slide? That this criteria includes that our credentials be workforce aligned, meaning that there are competencies and skills that are recognized, that we have relevant and portable achievements, and that they're aligned to workforce needs using validated open skills. And I'm going to, yeah, thank you. This is a link to our WGU Open Skills Library. And then this is how we build a badge. On our next slide is how we build a badge. All of our badges come with skill descriptors, and they are hyperlinked to our open library of skills. So for more information, including some registrar lessons learned, I invite you to join us at our presentation at AACRAO, which I believe is Monday at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. And I'd also like to give a plug for Drew Lurker, the Ivy Tech College Registrar, on the registrar's role in alternative credentials that will be following ours that same day. So thank you, guys.
Thank you so much for that sharing, Gabby, and for promoting other sessions as well. We definitely have time for questions from the audience, so please do feel free to use that Q&A function, or can also monitor the chat if that's easier for you. One thing that I would like to start out by asking you is, all three of you really, gave attention to the why. And so, I think that that's something that can, we can get lost in the technology and in the shininess, but just from a change management perspective, it just seems like that's just such a key. And so just wanted to check in case anybody wants to dive a little bit deeper into sharing about just how important you think it is to just know our why as a driver of this work. And Keisha, I see you kind of nodding. Maybe I can start with you of just, what advice or just observations and learnings do you have about the importance of the why?
Well, I mean, it's obviously important to understand what the purpose is. We don't know, nobody needs to launch another thing that they don't need down the line, right? If it's something that doesn't have a value add to it, you don't want to launch something that you really just that doesn't have a purpose in the end. And there's a lot of questions that people have about what's going to happen with micro credentials. How do you ensure people have access to it beyond your institution once they graduate? If a company closes down, what's going to happen with the credentials and what's put in there? You really have to think through all of these things to make sure that you're doing this appropriately. And is there a value add to it, right? If we oversaturate the market with credentials, then they're going to lose their value if people don't feel like there's a reason behind why we're giving those out to people. So it's really, really important that there is some thoughtfulness behind what goes on in this process, and why we're actually doing this work. So that's just the obvious reason for me.
I love that. And I also love that you mentioned something there. I think that unless a registrar is at the table, that some of those worst case scenario handbook conditions just aren't getting thought of and considered intentionally. Darren, I saw you kind of enthusiastically nodding there as well. I don't know if you want to jump in.
Sure. So the why is very important, super important. It's your North Star. And at WGU, we tell each other and we say to ourselves all the time, we're student obsessed. And so everything we do starts with our students. How can we make their learning more valuable? What's the promise of our learning? How can we improve their lives through the transformational nature of education? And that guides everything that we do. So as a result, and Gabby touched on this, our credentials have to have meaning defined by their perceived value in the market by employers. So as a competency-based institution, we've always been aligned to the employment market. We then doubled down by denominating all of our competencies in the language of employers, which is skills. What we know from our learners is that they want to have a better way of talking about the value of their education. So part of the design principle behind our Achievement Wallet platform is to provide them the vocabulary, the language, the insight, and the context of their learning. Kim mentioned soon we're going to be doing course level assertions. That's because even our courses are skills denominated, and we want them to understand how their skills profile grows and adapts to whatever pathway they are pursuing. So we'll be able to show that to them in real time. But we also know that employers that for the longest time have accepted our degrees as, I think I pretty much can understand what you know as a graduate, but now they're starting to ask, but what can you do? So we're intentional in terms of our badge design, as Gabby hinted at again, that we need to be very transparent about the skills and the demonstration, the earning criteria for these credentials so that employers have a better handle on what an individual can do as well as what they know. And then the last thing that I would say is that as you enter into this space, it is super important to have your registrar involved because the nature of digital credentials, the fact that they are transparent, and as we adapt to a dynamic economy, and jobs are changing. AI is the next big revolution. The credentials that we offer will change and mutate and need to be updated. We've got to have the registrar's voice front and center in those conversations because we need to understand, can we version this badge or do we need to create a new badge or credential? So understanding all of that starts with your why. Why are you doing this? What's the value you're bringing for your students?
Darren, thank you so much for that. And, I think that's something that you were sort of touching on there is a really great segue to ask Megan this question, because Megan, one of the things that I sense in the preview of your session is looking at our why, not just for a single stakeholder, but actually having to take in a broad ecosystem stakeholders in looking at the why. I see you nodding there. What is, what do you have to say, Megan, about just addressing the why based on who needs to hear the why?
Yeah, so I was thinking as both Darren and Keisha were talking, like, oh, we're kind of building on both of those points, right? Like we are very student-centered as well, but it's important for every member of the ecosystem to see the value for them as well. And I don't see that as like any sort of shameless thing, right? Like any of us want to know what's in it for me. And any good project is going to have multiple benefits for all stakeholders involved, right? Those are the strongest. Those are the strongest new concepts. Those are the strongest innovations. Those are the strongest projects, right? So you have to be mindful of that for everybody who's involved with you. And so, like, as I'm thinking about a lot of what Darren was saying with our students, I see someone in the chat said interoperability, but like the portability of it as well. I mean, just like we are no longer place-based in the students we're seeking out to enroll in our institution, our students are no longer place-based in terms of seeking out employment opportunities either, right? So we need to find that common language, like Darren was saying, and make sure that it speaks as broadly as possible for both our students making meaning of the learning they're doing, but then how they could communicate it out to any employer that they have, on their list of potentials, or, that they would come in contact with. Also, as like Keisha was stating, we don't need another project on our list necessarily just for the sake of completing a project, but I push folks to think about what kind of infrastructure are we actually laying down by adopting a wallet that will help aid so many of those other to-dos on our list, right? Like, as we are starting to capture more data, as we're starting to visualize more of what's going on with our students and their learning and their pursuits after they're with our institution, how well then could that data help inform any of the other critical things on our list, right? If we're trying to diversify our student enrollment, if we're trying to check how well we are accepting or our own courses are being accepted in transfer. I mean, name any of those things, right, that are top of list for registrars today. So I think being able to speak to those, not just for our students, other institutions' students, but then the institutions themselves and any of the stakeholders that we would bring in. So just like the others have said, I think registrar's office, yes, higher ed more so plays such a critical role because of where we're positioned in the broader landscape of things, right? That bigger ecosystem. And we can look both downstream and upstream to help inform those conversations and really tap into those relationships that we have.
Thank you so much for that, Megan. And Mike, I see you nodding. This is a preview of the AACRAO annual meeting, and we're here on an AACRAO webinar. And from the AACRAO perspective, what is the why? As we why is there a innovative credentials track at the annual meeting, and why is it from the AACRAO perspective so essential that the registrar and enrollment management professionals are taking a lead in this space?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of levels of this, and the first is just the very practical. And I alluded to this earlier. Our members, our AACRAO registrars and enrollment professionals are faced with these questions and these opportunities and these issues every day. And as an association, we have to provide information to prepare and equip and showcase and all the things and provide tools. So at a very practical level, it's just the job of the association on this and other topics that are new. We look at this one as, so there's some really around the corner issues. And you might say something like AI. Last year, AI was around the corner and now it's in front of us. And so innovative credentials and the things that these folks are talking about, they're not so much around the corner, but we still find in our data that the majority of institutions, the majority of our members are still not deeply immersed in this. A recent survey that we did, well, actually last fall, indicated about 67% of our members that there was something going on at their institution, and whether it was a department doing a badge or whether the continuing education unit was issuing a credential or some iteration of these various types of things. But when you got drilling down into it a little bit more, the kind of sophisticated efforts that you're talking about, the university-wide, institution-wide efforts that these three institutions have indicated it's a far less percentage. So a lot of people are dabbling, and our goal is to show, okay, well, dabbling is great, but as Megan said, maybe you want to jump into this. And at WGU, they're way down the road on this. And Keisha and her partnership with Territorium, they've gone down the road, and Megan is just starting. So there's everybody's at the various places, and our role is to showcase and not to tell anybody, because institution type is a huge variable in this. Look at the institutions we have represented here. And we could split that even further. Geographic location, economic region, going down the list. There's a variety of lenses through which to look. And the other thing I want to say is philosophically, there are, why AACRAO, why, because and I say this a lot in presentations, credential, registrar, duh, right? So if we're talking about credentials in higher education, registrar should have some place in that conversation. And it's not always a lead. So I'm going to preview a session that we're doing about stakeholders. And we talked a lot about stakeholders here, but we actually, AACRAO is a part of a broader higher education coalition of stakeholders. Think on a campus of the number of folks who could or likely to be involved. And you've seen some here, but it ranges from the registrar to IT to academic affairs, to continuing education, to the career center. I can just go on down the list, the president, the provost, and there's any number of ways that these things come in the door at an institution. And so it's important that AACRAO on a national level represents and helps foster that conversation, so that on a institutional level, you would know. The other things that our survey information has shown that registrars are not always the lead on these. But we also know they don't always need to be the lead, they just need to be involved because of the hundreds of years worth of history of doing credentials. Even though there's innovation in credentials and the technology has changed and the ability to do things differently, the premises behind the validity and veracity of a credential and what makes them valid, what makes them legitimate, what makes an institutional reputation stand, what makes identity solid, those things are still the same. And last time I checked, that's what registrars do. So that's why we are interested in promoting this conversation.
Thank you so much for that, Mike. And Gabby, I want to come to you next on, just as Mike was describing this at a philosophical level, I think a lot of AACRAO members who were listening to what Darren was describing there in some of this screen sharing from their slides is stuff that kind of is, doesn't necessarily look and smell and taste like a lot of what we're used to dealing with learning records in the office of the registrar. And so, from what Mike described at a theoretical level, it sounds like you might be dealing with it at a very practical level of, what is that like for the office of the registrar to engage in, embracing these different kinds of learning records and seeing that as very much being our place?
I would say that starting into that conversation at first was a little challenging and difficult. And you see that everybody's approaching this conversation from different perspectives. At Western Governors University, when we started down this path, we have an credential integrity group, and they were approaching it from programs. We were approaching it from the record and, making sure that we had validated credentials and that we weren't putting our students in situations to like what Keisha was saying, where somebody comes with something that was issued from somewhere else. And so making sure that we're sharing those use cases, that we're explaining the impact of those decisions that are being made around the wallet and around those digital credentials, and keeping everything organized and aligned. And then just approaching it with curiosity. Why are you wanting to do it this way? And is this the best way that we can do it?
Thank you so much for that. I'm really loving your idea of a credential integrity group. I think that as we think around, like Mike previewed their session on stakeholder engagement, that the more we can involve different campus stakeholders in lending their leadership voices, there might be opportunities to not just have kind of stakeholder engagement, but also it sort of doubles as a subtle way to socialize and internally market some of this stuff. And Darren, I see in the chat there you shared curiosity is key. And Earlier we had from John, well, sorry, I'm having to really scroll to find it, but talking about just the importance of having these governance frameworks that there it is. We run the risk of having 14 different credentials for the exact same thing. Alignment and standardization for key performance indicators in employment would be key. And I see a lot of people nod. I think also just having agreements around words is probably really helpful too. That who gets to own the word leadership on our campus could be some interesting battles. Next question for our panelists is that I'd like to ask is, what are you excited to learn about at the annual meeting next week? We know that you're going to be there as presenters, but what are you, showing up with your learning hat on?
I can start with that. I mean, especially being, I think, as terms of like the members of the panel here being the newbie in the block, but I think we've already highlighted the fact that things are they change so quickly with this, right? Because it is still such a new concept. And so I'm interested in learning as much as I can in terms of like keeping a pulse on it, right? Like what, from when I attended a year ago, from some of the other conferences I've been to lately, like what is the current status now? And so I'm really looking forward to, both, the other groups on this panel and then a few others that are going to help me build out that why, right? But then also give me some of the, like, what are the outcomes now for some of the groups who are further down the road? Like what have you achieved? Did they meet your goals? And then that in balance with what was the level of labor and timeline needed to achieve that, right? So I think those are the critical pieces of conversation that I can take back to my group to then help, like I said, propel that why. Like, okay, there are groups out there doing the work. There are folks who are ahead of us. They've been successful in these ways, and it really took like this amount of labor, right? Those are the big questions the people I'm talking to in our smaller group, those are the big questions they're asking.
I'll go ahead and
So,
jump in.
okay, go
Sorry,
ahead, Kim.
Darren, didn't mean to jump
Nope,
in before
you go first.
Megan, I completely agree with everything that you just said. Learning from all of the different partners that are engaged in this work, that is how we've gotten to the place that we are at right now, and collaborating with a number of partners on what are the incremental steps that we need to take to advance, and they are incremental. How do we keep individuals, how do we keep students at the center, and what kind of equity considerations do we need to think about at each one of these incremental steps? One thing that we're grappling with right now is there's a statistic that about half of Americans aren't comfortable using technology to learn. And here we are promoting an entire ecosystem of technology use in order to advance. How do we ensure that while we are doing this, we are simultaneously ensuring that the half of Americans that aren't comfortable using technology to learn are able to, once this is in constant use? And so really working with partners and learning from partners is one of the things that I look forward to the most at this conference.
So to follow on what you were saying, Kim, I'm interested in how other people are approaching this space. I don't make a distinction between those that are just starting versus those that might be further along, because there's something to learn from each participant. And this goes to what Kim was talking about collaboration, partnerships. I think all of us have mentioned that. Sometimes you can get so close to your project that you develop tunnel vision and you start to convince yourself of your own narrative that this is the right thing to do. I think it's important to pay attention to what others are doing, how they're addressing the challenges that maybe we faced and have moved past, so we think. That's where the learning can occur, is how are they approaching it? What's their takeaway? What's their perspective on this? And did we miss something? Or can we learn and incorporate those perspectives into our own thinking? That's what I'm interested in learning.
I really appreciate what you're saying, Darren. I was thinking about that, especially like while Gabby was talking too. I kept thinking in my mind the phrase like one hand knowing what the other hand is doing, right? You know, and also at the same time, I don't want us to like overwhelm anyone who's listening to this. Like there is so much opportunity to collaborate with others and be involved, but you don't have to, one, take it to that step immediately, right? You can ease into this, but also know that two, like fresh perspective is important, right? And so don't think that you have to achieve some level of understanding before you can start having conversations with not just the folks across your campus, but with other institutions. And don't forget the power that we have as a collective group too, to influence like our vendors and the decisions they're making. Love you, Territorium. But also like some of the committees and through your associations who are trying to come up with like best practices and standards and everything related to this. Like, don't ever think you have a stupid question, right? Like I've been asking all of them, right, to learn. And then I just appreciate the folks who will go through them again with me, right? Because as I learn a new piece of information, I have to kind of think about how that incorporates with like the body of knowledge I already have. And I'm sometimes asking the question again to make sure that I'm maintaining like that level of understanding. So don't ever feel bad about asking the question or just like popping an idea out there. That's a great way to get started in this field too.
I was going to say one really cool thing that sort of came out of the One Ed Tech conference is we happened to be in a session there were like 6 people from Maryland, all of whom we didn't know we were all in the same spot. We didn't know we were sitting there, but now there's, and I want to give shouts to my colleagues at UMBC, Colin Sullivan, and we now are part of a community of practice here because we're thinking to ourselves, okay, well, we're kind of a small state. It's all going to overlap with one another at some point. Let's share. And so I think one of the cool things about registrars is we're not about gatekeeping when it comes to information. And I think anybody that comes to AACRAO knows that. You go to a session, you ask someone and follow up with them about their slides or how they did something, and people are always willing to be helpful. They're always willing to share their information. I've never had any other experience in that. And so I think it'll be really great for people who are starting in this space or well far along in this space to just have those conversations. Because like you all said right now, everybody's doing something different. Eventually, it's going to have to come to some sort of moment where everything means the same thing or means close to the same thing. People are using terminology interchangeably. There's so much work to be done in this space. And so I'm just really excited about the prospects of like connecting with other folks that are doing this work and all the other work that everybody's doing in the registrar's offices across the country. So this is going to be really exciting. The conference is always great. We always make good connections there. So
I will definitely hop in and say one thing that piggybacking on what Megan shared there is for me, one of the things that I'm most excited to learn is what the questions are that people ask. The people who raise their hand and ask questions at the end of sessions is such a great way to get the finger on the pulse and to get that newer perspective that I don't have the same distance as they do anymore. And so that's one of the things that I learn a whole lot from. That I'm really excited about for next week. And piggyback on Keisha's shout out for Colin Sullivan. That was actually who was supposed to be our guest yesterday on our weekly credential chats. Unfortunately, we could not get the live stream to start. We were in the room and trying, and we finally just had to say we're going to reschedule that. I think it's going to be on the 22nd. So heads up on that in a few weeks. A final question that I'd love to put out to our panelists is around, all 3 of you and Mike as well talked about ecosystems, even if you didn't use that word, that what we're talking about here is trusted, verifiable, accurate learning records that have users going beyond, AACRAO members, that I heard examples of learners not just receiving these credentials, but actually using them and other stakeholders as well. And, I think that might be something really valuable in our final moments to hear if anybody feels comfortable sharing your perspective on the importance of that ecosystem consideration when we think about what we're trying to do here. And Megan, you were kind of nodding there, and I know that you actually began your work doing, I don't want to give too much of your session away, but I know you started with some of that broad ecosystem engagement. So maybe we could start with.
That's exactly how our design sprint started. We had pulled people from, workforce, K-12, other higher ed institutions, non-traditional learning or informal learning providers. I mean, think about like your local Girl Scouts or Boy Scouts troop, or we've got like the local nature center who issues their own credentials for different learning. And then, like I said, we almost ended up going like all the way back through that again, that process, once we had landed on our vendor and started having conversations and getting insight from them. What I've been saying the whole way along, and why, like I said, I really am hoping people will get the gist from my presentation, that it is not a linear process. It's kind of like this kind of process sometimes, or it's like this kind of process sometimes, right? Because you just want to recap so much information over again, just to double check it and make sure, like we've been saying, that you're getting all the input and everything that you need. Because the biggest thing that I'm trying to avoid for my students, or any of our students, is we don't ever want to send them down any sort of dead end, right? So you have to be very mindful of who all is in that ecosystem. I saw the the question in the chat there, like, right, who is not at this table yet, who needs to be brought to this table? Because if we're designing something like this, if we're going to start participating in something like this, we want to make sure that it maintains like its fullest capacity and fullest capability as possible. The joke I keep saying is I don't want to get my students moved on to the laser disc, that's dead after a couple of years after that, right? So like, we want this to be something that sticks, right? Because we see the good that can come from it. So who else do we need to include in that conversation? I've already listed a few, including, like I've said, the vendors, the associations, all of those. And we're just taking it, one phase at a time here at Grand Valley.
I'm going to use a very nerdy way of, or not nerdy, but ecosystem for us is important, because it's just like sort of if you all build a pipe into or out of a house and it has a dead end. So it's almost in a technical sense, the ecosystem has to be more than an institution, an individual, an employer. The things have to link together, and that is a technical specification as well as a practical consideration. The ecosystem includes a lot of people. Now, that also creates the big challenge, right? Just look at the folks represented here and their various nuanced approaches and takes. And so part of the work that AACRAO and others are trying to do is facilitate these kinds of conversations. Like everyone said, it's better to ask other people, talk to other people, things. And I think we should mention, other partners are vendors. Every one of the people that in this webinar works regularly with vendor partners who have, for their own purposes, great products, and they have great intentions, and they have specific ways of doing things. And so there's an obligation there. And I think, Megan, you're probably going to get at this a little bit in your thing, talking about how you even look at those questions. Okay, we do this and we do that, and how do you even choose between them? So to me, the ecosystem is a very practical. It's not a scary word. It's just a very practical thing of it's bigger than any one entity in this. And that's what you have to remember, because the moment, Darren, like you said, the moment you get tunnel vision, the thing becomes a dead end. And that sounds goofy, but it is so true. It is really so true.
Mike, just building off of that, we sometimes joke around that there's a lot of like orbit me mentality when it comes to some of these conversations, and this approach is not the orbit me, whether it's like institutions or vendors or organizations. It is that we orbit the student, and always going back to that. So it's not orbit me, it's like we are orbiting the student.
And I just can't thank you very much, Kevin, for jumping in there. I was about to ask you to unmute based off what you'd shared in the chat. I think that's a great place for us to kind of wind down here, is that we have this greater ecosystem, and that we are all sharing an orbit that's around our students. That's, I think, something that really shines through in all three of your presentations that you previewed today, is that this is really stuff that's centering the learner, that we are doing, in service of our learners to help them have access to, their successful futures, thanks to the currency of amazing, and descriptive recognitions of their learning achievement through digital credentials. So thank you to our panelists for sharing your time and expertise with us in previewing and highlighting your sessions for next week's annual meeting. And thank you so much to all of our AACRAO attendees. We were really cool how many of you not just registered, but actually showed up for the live and stayed the whole time, which is just a real honor and privilege to serve all of you. So thank you so much. And thank you everybody for joining. We appreciate you. Have a badge-worthy week, and we will see you next week, hopefully in Ohio.
Safe travels, everyone.